I'm now going to turn it over to our state agency partners to introduce themselves and jump into their presentation.
All right, great. Thank you, Danielle, and thank you, Chris, for that introduction. We're super excited to be here today. And even though we're in a virtual state conference this year, it's a little bit of a bummer. It's always fun to see people in person in past year's conference, but excited to be here and sharing some information in today's webinar. So for our hour session today, the title of our webinar is State Agency Partnerships Advancing Employment First. And this is a joint presentation by the Minnesota Departments of Human Services and Employment and Economic Development, so DHS and DEED respectively here in Minnesota. We'd like to start by introducing our presenters for this afternoon. I'll start with myself. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Mers. I'm our employment coordinator with the Disability Services Division at DHS. So a lot of my work is around collaborating across our different business areas within the division and helping fulfill and support our state's Employment First policy. And I'm joined by two awesome colleagues here today, Amanda and Tony. And so I'll pass it over to them to introduce themselves, starting with Amanda.
Hi everyone, Amanda Jensen Stahl, and I work for DEED Vocational Rehabilitation Services, VRS, and I am the manager of interagency partnerships and business engagement. So really excited to be here presenting with Ryan and Tony, and I'll pass it to Tony.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tony Gattenbein. I'm disappointed I put on a sport coat and you can't see me. But anyways, I work with Ryan over at Disability Services at Department of Human Services, and I work on the waiver policy and compliance team, and I'm one of the employment subject matter experts.
All right, great. And it should definitely be noted, thanks for bringing that up, Tony, but we are all wearing suit coats, dressed very professionally for today, and I think we were also very excited for an opportunity to put on the Ritz. So for today, we've got two goals for our session today. The first goal is to provide you all with an update on the collaborative efforts between DEED and DHS to improve employment outcomes for people with disabilities in Minnesota. So, you know, over the past year, we've just had a really incredible amount of interagency collaboration and work going on. And a lot of this is stuff that, you know, we've been working together on. So we just thought it would be a great opportunity at the APSE State Conference to be able to share some of that work and kind of let everyone see or just know what we're up to and what we're working on. As sort of a sub-bullet point under that, but really an area that we want to focus on today in our session is we want to update you all on our work to create a more aligned employment service provider pool in Minnesota. So basically our efforts to encourage dual enrollment among employment service providers, both from waiver services and vocational rehabilitation services, or VRS. So those are our two goals for today. You know, a quick housekeeping point, Danielle covered a lot of this housekeeping in the introduction, but the way that we'll structure questions is as we're going through the presentation today, if you got questions, throw them into the chat. We've reserved some time at the end to go through and address them. All right, so our agenda for today. Right now we're in our short introduction period. Then I'm gonna be starting us off in talking about our interagency employment efforts, so that first bullet point, what we're doing across our agencies. And then I'm gonna pass it over to Amanda and Tony to talk about our employment service provider alignment efforts. And then we've got about 15 minutes at the end for question and answers with chat. Quick note here, especially for Amanda and Tony, as I'm going through with my screen share, I'm not able to see the chats coming in. So just if there's anything that's like really red alert or whatever, just flag it for me and I'll see it. So all right, our first section, our interagency employment efforts. All right, so there's three things that I wanted to cover in this section today. First is I want to talk about some work we've been doing around developing a unified brand. So it's kind of a funny thing to talk about the branding for our work between our agencies, but basically we're going to be rolling out a way to organize and communicate our interagency employment work in the coming months, and want to talk about what that effort is and kind of what's behind it. Secondly, I'll cover how we're aligning our supports for people receiving waiver services. So focus in on people receiving waiver services and what we're doing to align our supports and our systems around supporting employment for people receiving waiver services. And then as I'm going through those items, I'm going to be highlighting some ways to stay up to date on the work that we're doing and get involved with the work that we're doing, just kind of as we're going through those. You know, and a really important note for all of this is, you know, I kind of mentioned it before, but we've got a lot of employment related efforts going on. You know, we're going to be getting some updates to our employment first dashboards for those of you that are aware of them in the coming weeks here. We've been doing some really cool work with the Disability Hub MN on creating work toolkits for support professionals. And we're doing some great work with the Department of Education around our transition age youth data and getting a better understanding of our outcomes and pathways for students that are exiting school or graduating. So anyway, so there's a lot of good stuff to go into, but really prioritizing the content for this section on those first 3 bullets. Right. So creating a unified identity and voice. There's 2 motivations here. First, DEED and DHS, so our 2 agencies, in September of 2019, so just about a year ago now, a little over a year ago now, we signed an Interagency Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU. And this agreement outlined visions, goals, and then specific agreements between our agencies to align our systems and kind of fulfill that vision. So as I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, we've been having a lot of work together, and we're going to be rolling out a lot of things in a collaborative effort to support the implementation of those agreements, so that we've got this one big chunk of work going on between our agencies. Then secondly, we're also, both DEED and DHS are having a lot of collaboration with the Minnesota Department of Education right now around school services and those pre-employment transition services, or pre-ET. So we've started some regular interagencies meetings focused on transition age youth. We've got a really strong employment capacity building cohort, or ECBC, this year. So this is a strategy that was originally an Olmsted goal strategy around supporting local level teams, providing technical assistance to them as they're collaborating to improve employment outcomes for transition age youth. And we're really putting a lot of renewed energy into the ECBC. And so this is another big chunk of work going on. So we've got these kind of 2 efforts, one targeted towards adults and people receiving waiver services. How are we coordinating our system? And then another that's around youth and kind of specifically transition age youth. So instead of referring to these as like the driving force for our work is our MOU or interagency agreement, or like a piece of paper, basically, we want to house our work and our efforts around our shared values and around our support for our state's employment first policy. So to that end, we're creating what we're calling E1MN. And then a tagline for E1MN is a state agency partnership advancing employment first. And on this slide, I'll just read it out a little quickly. It outlines the goals of this brand or of this partnership. So E1MN works to deliver a more seamless and timely employment support system for people with disabilities. This partnership, led by our 3 agencies, plans and coordinates our services and our employment first approaches, removes barriers and confusion to make it easier for people to navigate employment services, works with local and culturally specific partners to improve access and equity to our services, and then just generally supports each other in bringing out the best our agencies have to offer. And then this E1MN brand or partnership, again, we're structuring it into like an E1 youth and an E1 adult, so that we're kind of having those 2 focus areas for our efforts. So we're excited. There's going to be kind of like logos and shared templates. From a very selfish standpoint, like when we were putting together this presentation today, I just realized it's like a DHS logoed slide deck. We'll be able to have E1MN branded slide decks. We'll just make it a little bit easier from the staff end. But I think also part of the goal of rolling out a partnership or this brand around E1MN is also to help cement that employment first language into our agency cultures, and then communicate that prioritization out to our partners in the community, so that we can really speak confidently around here are employment first efforts, and here's what we're doing in partnership across our agencies. So very excited to be rolling it out. You'll be seeing more information about this in the coming months. I think we're hoping to get some listserv stuff out in the next month. That's our E1MN brand. And now to start to pull this into the work that we're doing right now as agencies, I thought I would put up our internal structures around our E1 adult effort. So this is a little different for me. Usually it's coming out and talking about, a new service or a program that we're rolling out right now. In this presentation today, I'm really talking about the work that we're doing between our agencies. So it's got a little bit of an internal focus. But you'll see from this, I guess it's an organization chart. I've got kind of two sets of boxes here. One are dark blue boxes, and those represent our interagency staff teams or working groups. And then there's another set of teal or light blue boxes over to the side, and those represent our stakeholder impact or our stakeholder input vehicles. So the way that we're getting feedback and able to incorporate into our efforts. So we've got a memorandum of understanding with all these great agreements between our two agencies and ways to align our system. And this map is sort of how we're structuring ourselves to be able to carry out those agreements. So we're governed by an interagency steering committee made up of our leadership from both of our areas. And then that steering committee really manages and keeps track of our work and kind of gives us the directives and helps us get the resources that we need to do our work. So that steering committee gives direction to a planning team, of which Amanda and I, and then another of our colleagues, Beth, are members. And then that planning team helps organize the work of two interagency staff level working groups that are like carrying out the actual work. They're creating the tools and resources, developing the policies, kind of helping sync everything together. And then so the planning team sort of serves as a communication between that steering committee and those work groups. Our two work groups are around service process and experience, and then service provider alignment. So again, a lot of what I'm presenting here today is that work group 1, that service process and experience, and then Amanda and Tony will be talking about work group 2, that provider alignment work. Over here for our stakeholder input, so our steering committee is getting input from the Interagency Employment First Advisory Committee, our Professional Input Panel on Employment, or PipeIn, and then our Virtual Insight Panel, or VIP. And I'm going to go into each of these 3 bodies right now and just describe them a little bit in their work. So first is the Interagency Employment First Advisory Committee. This is a voluntary committee overseen by DEED and DHS. That steering team that provides strategic advice and consultation in fulfilling the shared vision and agreements in our MOU, provides input on how we're implementing that agreement, and then identifies opportunities to basically improve the experience and outcomes for people who are receiving waiver services and also pursuing competitive integrated employment. So it's kind of a broad feedback group. It meets on a bi-monthly basis, so like every other month. And it's been a really good group for feedback. We've got some really great committee members. There's 14 of them, and they're representatives from trade organizations, advocacy organizations, from people receiving services and families. And APSE's also got a member on this advisory committee. So really great. It's a great place for us to get kind of that like strategic level, how are we living into these agreements, and really get a beat on what is this looking like in different areas and what are the communication needs. You can learn more about the Interagency Employment First Advisory Committee at our DHS and DEED MOU webpage, and there's a hyperlink there. The second vehicle through which we're getting stakeholder input on our efforts is the Professional Input Panel on Employment, or PipeIn. And PipeIn is a volunteer group of professionals who want to provide feedback to DHS and DEED on our work to align our employment service system and advance our employment first policy. And so this is a group that's made up of support professionals, whether it's like waiver case managers, employment service providers, staff, vocational rehabilitation service counselors, school staff. There's about 250 members across the state in PipeIn, and these support professionals, you sign up online. It's a pretty quick application, and then as those 2 working groups that I mentioned before are creating tools and resources or looking at policies, and they've got questions or identify a need for feedback, PipeIn is the vehicle that we reach out to get that feedback, because a lot of our efforts are around things that will impact support professionals and the way that they do their business. So PipeIn is a way for us to kind of get that agile feedback. It's things that it's easy for us to conduct an outreach, and then hopefully easy for PipeIn members to be able to respond when we're asking those questions. And so it's a way that we can kind of get quick feedback and then have really impactful feedback to guide our efforts. Things that we can incorporate quickly as we're developing these tools, resources, and policies. But anyway, so PipeIn members participate in focus groups and surveys and interviews, and the participation is based on what their area of expertise is. So sometimes we might reach out to the case managers in PipeIn, and sometimes we might reach out to the advocacy organizations in PipeIn. But anyways, signing up is super, super easy. It takes like 5 minutes. There's a hyperlink to the application down here. So I super encourage anyone who's watching this recorded webinar or with us here today to sign up for PipeIn. And then you just get notified of events that might be relevant to you and your role, and you can pick which ones you participate in. We've actually had PipeIn, like super high participation rates in PipeIn, so a lot of people engaging in activities, but it's a good way to provide feedback and then also just stay up to date on what we're doing, see what we're putting together. And then finally, the last group that we're using to gather feedback is the Virtual Insight Panel, or VIP. And VIP is set up very similar to PipeIn in that it's online registration, and a lot of the activities are online, like surveys, interviews, focus groups. But PipeIn is really directed towards Minnesotans with disabilities, especially those that might be receiving waiver services, and then as well as the supports that they have behind them, like family members and that stuff. And it's a way for us to get input from people with disabilities in Minnesota. It's got like I said, a very similar format to PipeIn. It's a super quick application to join. And I do believe for VIP, there's some incentives for participation. So I do think when people fill out surveys and stuff, there's like gift cards and stuff that can come with it. So VIP is a great way to get your voice heard, not just with employment. VIP is not just employment focused, but it's really more broadly around our employment, our disability services in Minnesota. All right. So I covered our internal structures and then how we're getting feedback and how we're carrying out the work. I'd now like to move into some of the big work that's going on right now around our service process experience. There's a lot of great agreements in our MOU and a lot of areas that has built clarity for us as we've begun working together as DEED and DHS. And one big area of clarification is that we've identified vocational rehabilitation services and state services for the blind as the primary providers for job search services. So so we have VRS and SSB as our primary funding source or providers for job search services, but then we also have waivers employment services that kind of cover a variety of supports that include job search services. So then it kind of puts us in this funny position. While we both provide job search services, how do I know where to go when? And as we rolled out our employment development services, our waiver employment services around job search, we provided interim guidance around authorizing those services. As we've worked on our MOU, we've gained increasing clarity around the federal definition and standard about how our programs work together. And I won't get into kind of like some of the detailed weeds here, but basically we're going to be replacing that interim guidance starting in July 1st of 2021 with more ongoing guidance, or like, I guess, more of like a finalized guidance around when to leverage waiver and when to leverage VR services. And this ongoing guidance is going to push us much more strongly in the direction of if you're going on a job search phase, VRS and SSB is going to be the place to go. So it's going to involve a lot more referrals across our programs, across waiver services and VRS SSB services. It means that people who might start doing some career exploration while receiving waiver services will transition over to vocational rehabilitation services to undertake a job search, and then might also come back to waiver services for the ongoing supports to maintain employment if they need there. So this puts us in a position where we've kind of functioned as separate programs in the past, but we're really identifying a need to align our services, because we know that people are going to need to start transitioning between our programs. So we want to make sure that those transitions are as timely and as seamless as possible. So we really want it to be you're receiving your employment services, not you're bouncing between these two state agencies. And that kind of in a nutshell is the kind of the tagline for a lot of our interagency work right now is how do we carry that out in the best way possible? And so some of the strategies that we're carrying out right now is number one, we're clarifying our roles and responsibilities for support professionals and the sequencing of our services. So it sounds a little bit simple, but it's actually been a really, really helpful exercise. And it's been really important to get groundwork to communicate out across the state, but basically identifying who's doing what when and how we each play a role in what we do to support people along their employment pathway. And so this has involved kind of creating detailed process maps for a person's experience as they might be receiving vocational rehabilitation services and waiver services. We're creating tools and resources for support professionals, so for like case managers or VR counselors or employment service providers, that will help with navigating our different services and kind of living into those roles and responsibilities. Thirdly, we're expanding our waiver employment exploration service, and I'll get into that in the next slides in a little bit more detail. And then third is we're going to be conducting coordinated training, communications, and technical assistance around these changes as they roll out this summer. And then finally, we're increasing our duly enrolled employment service providers. And that's the next part of our presentation, but we'll be going into more detail there. So to spend a couple slides here or a little bit of time around one of our strategies, which is expanding employment exploration service. So one thing that we've learned as we've done all of this work to clarify our federal rules and to identify in our MOU the roles each of our organizations are playing, employment exploration services, so that kind of like informed choice, career planning, initial job goal development, as well as the ongoing supports to maintain employment, are really clear allowable uses of waiver funding. So those are areas where we can really leverage our waiver services and bring them to bear. Coupled with this, we've also identified that we have pretty low use in terms of authorization and billing for our waiver employment exploration service statewide. So we want to be able to strengthen this service and then kind of prepare it for like increased use. If we know this is a good option that we have under waiver services, we want to make sure that it's as strong as possible and that it's helping people advance their employment goals as much as possible. So over this past year and preparing for implementation in this coming July, this summer, we're expanding employment exploration services so that the scope of the service goes beyond helping people make informed choices about employment. So, more than just like a, do you want to work in the community, yes or no kind of service, to having it be something that helps people develop preliminary employment goals and connect with job search supports. So to really help people, really increase the way that service is helping people experience work in the community or competitive integrated employment, to see that and understand it, but then also develop some of that, the preliminary things that will help them, kind of launch their job search forward and get them thinking about goals that they would want out of a job search. So, employment exploration services, it's not something that's going to be for everyone. Obviously, if someone wants to go find a job in the community, they get referral over to VR, SSB. If they need those supports, they can start, their job search in the community. But it can be a really valuable tool for people that might not have as defined of a vision of what they want to do around employment, or might have like concerns about what community employment could mean for them. So starting this July, employment exploration services will result in a collection of deliverables that are organized to a profile. So as we've expanded this service, we also wanted to increase our definition of the service. One thing that we've heard is that, it's not quite clear what you're supposed to do under exploration and what's supposed to come out of it. We want to make sure that as part of our changes, we want to create that clear understanding of like, hey, when you go through exploration, here's what it results in for you. Here's what you get out of this service. And we're doing that through creating a profile that's sort of a collection of things or deliverables that you're completing during the exploration service. So this includes an employment profile documenting people's strengths and interests, who's on their employment supports team, you know, answering or thinking about common things like how are we going to address transportation, are there conditions for employment that are going to be important to think about, and what previous work experiences do I have. Also through exploration, people will be able to build a resume and a sample application, and then conduct a benefits lookup so that they've got information on their benefits to inform their job search, so that they're able to do benefits planning as they're preparing for competitive employment. So we've got these deliverables that we have and expecting to be created out of exploration services. And then we're also developing right now online tools and templates that especially service providers can use in the creation of deliverables and to help people put them together. So they wouldn't be things that are like required as far as completing this profile, but it would be a really useful tool that people can work through to create this profile. It'll be kind of cool online tools, like if you're familiar with charting the life course activity, we're adapting some of those tools to be used in this profile. And then we're also looking to leverage the Vault, or basically an online account that people can use to work through and develop these tools, as well as share that information across their supports team. So again, with the goal of making those transitions more seamless and making it easier for people to share information across their employment supports team. All right, so that's a quick overview of the work around coordinating services for people receiving, or coordinating our efforts for people receiving waiver services between DHS and DEED. I've mentioned this webpage a couple of times in the presentation today, but really wanted to call it out in its own slide. On the Disability Hub MN page, we have a specific MOU webpage that provides links, and it's kind of like our one-stop shop for all of our MOU related efforts, all of our DHS, what we're doing under those shared agreement efforts. So it's got monthly updates about what we're doing. Anytime we do a PipeIn activity, we're posting the results from those activities or the report out of what we learned on this website. And it's also got like meeting minutes for that Employment First Advisory Committee. So this is a great link to go to stay up to date on our work. With that being said, I'm going to close the first section of our presentation here today and hand it over to Amanda and Tony to talk about our employment service provider alignment efforts.
Thanks, Ryan. All right, this is Amanda, and I will kick us off. Next slide, please, Ryan. So as Ryan highlighted, one of the big efforts that we have been working on is that service provider alignment. And what that means is we really want to encourage new and existing employment service providers to become duly enrolled in each of our programs. So on the waiver side of things, it would mean becoming 245D licensed. And on the VRS SSB side, it would mean becoming a professional and technical contract holder. We often refer to it as PT contract. And so as Ryan talked about, because our services are really going to be linked together, the more duly enrolled providers we have, then the more seamless somebody can access those services and just kind of move between the two systems versus having to jump around to different providers. And so as Ryan mentioned, we have an interagency work group that is focusing on this effort, and we've been working fast and furious around strategies to do this. Next slide, Ryan. So we think that having more duly enrolled providers will help people, as I mentioned, have those more seamless transitions between programs. Providers will have the financial viability for employment services. The system, so on both sides, will align on best practices and standards, so you don't have to adhere to different standards on either side, and really address the gaps in employment service availability statewide. So really looking statewide at having the availability of providers, looking at, geographically, but then also looking at other factors. Next slide, Ryan. So here are just a quick overview of some of the strategies that we are working on to encourage dual enrollment. One of the things on my end, on VRS SSB, is we have, and I'll talk about a little bit more in a couple slides, a limited use vendor. And we recently increased that limit. And so that's one thing that we've been able to sort of check off our list, but that was a huge one. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Again, on our side, we are looking at, it's called a performance-based agreement. I'm sure a lot of you who are tuning in are familiar with the PBAs, we like to call it. And so we know that serving individuals who are on waivers, who are seeking competitive integrated employment, in a lot of cases, it could be for the first time. Maybe they've had other employment experiences in a work crew, enclave, etc. We know that those individuals may need more intensive supports to find a job in competitive integrated employment. And so we're looking at a supported employment PBA, so looking at how we can fund for those services versus the existing funding mechanism that we currently have. We're also looking at data to identify who are our existing providers, again, on both sides, on the 245D side and on the VRS SSB side, and really mapping that out so that we can see where do we have overlap and where do we not? And then do we have parts of the state, as I mentioned, where we don't have any providers, or maybe we have one and they're only a 245D license. And so really helping inform us in where our kind of shared providers are and being able to see that on a map. So that's really cool, and we're excited about that work. And then finally, making it very clear and hopefully easy for providers who want to become 245D licensed or want to become a provider with VRS or SSB, helping, like, what do you need to do to do that? What are the steps you need to take? And making sure that we have the infrastructure and the technical assistance to help providers do that. Next slide, please. All right, so I talked about that increased limit for LUVs. So some of you may be familiar, but on the VRS SSB side of things, we have professional and technical contracts in order for any provider that works with us. That's a state of Minnesota thing, and that's how we can purchase services. And so if a provider wants to become a limited use vendor, it means that they are not CARF accredited. And so per our state rule, if you're not CARF accredited, we have to limit the amount of business that we can do. And so we, as I mentioned, we raised that maximum budget cap as of July 1st of 2020. So we're really excited about that because we really think that'll help encourage new providers who maybe want to kind of dip their toe in the VRS SSB waters. So that cap is now $100,000 per year or $200,000 over a 2-year period. And for existing providers, so in case there's any, I know we've sent messages, but if you're currently in LUV, just know that we do need to do a contract amendment to increase that cap. It used to be $20,000 per year and $40,000 over 2 years. So we're really happy that, you know, particularly for smaller providers, or again, providers who maybe are like, I don't know if I want to become CARF accredited, they can start here and see how that goes. If you have questions, I know we don't have a lot of time. I can get, you know, I can certainly answer, or I'll provide the information to our 2 community partner contacts around CARF, like what does CARF mean? But CARF accreditation would allow a provider to really have unlimited business with VRS. And we've got the link here. So, you know, we have lots of information on our DEED VRS website. So certainly that's a great resource as well. Next slide. So I mentioned the Supported Employment Performance-Based Agreement, PBA, that we are in the process of creating a new funding structure. So we'll still be using that performance-based agreement. For those of you that are familiar, we don't pay an hourly rate for job placement services. It's really an outcome-based milestone payment funding structure. And our goal is to have that be ready next July 2021 as part of the implementation of those MOU agreements. So we've been looking at other payment structures that other state VR agencies use, and really just hoping to come to a funding structure that supports quality services and incentivizes results. We did Ryan mentioned the PipeIn, and we did a feedback activity in late August to gather feedback on provider preference around milestone payments, and that was really helpful. We got some fantastic feedback from that. So if any of you out there participated in that PipeIn activity, we are really grateful for that feedback. It's just helping us as we're thinking about what makes sense for milestones, what is going to work the best for providers. So getting that feedback is great. So another plug for PipeIn. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that we are really trying to make it easy and clear on how you can become a provider on either side. Tony's going to talk about the waiver side, but my message is that new providers can apply at any time. So at any time you can reach out to us. We don't have like certain times of the year or anything like that. If you're an existing provider and you want to amend your contract, then we have specific timings. But if you're a new provider, anytime, you just need to contact us. We review the application and we work with new providers through that process, especially that first time around. It can be, it's not complicated, but you just have to make sure that you have everything to develop that PT contract. Next slide, please. So all the information is located on our website, but really the main documents that you want to review is there's a request for proposal. And we have that on the website. We also have an example of a sample PT contract. I think for new providers, one of the more challenging things is what we want you to do is list out the services that you're going to be providing and then tell us what your rate is. And sometimes that's a little, you may think, well, I'm not sure, I don't want to like overcharge or undercharge. And so it's helpful to look at that sample application. And then you can also look at all of the contracts that all of our existing providers have. And so sometimes that's helpful to take a look at another provider's contract just to kind of see like how they've developed their services and fee structure. We have information and instructions. And then we also have on the next slide, if you'll go to that one, Ryan, we've got two staff that I mentioned, Ann Paulson and Sarah Sundin at VRS. That's all they do is contracting, and they are super knowledgeable and are, you can email them, you can call them, you can also send it to that general VRS PT contracts email. They both see that. So if one of them is out, they can get to it. You can also contact me. I'm really happy to answer any questions as well. And then on the state services for the blind side, our sister agency, if you're interested in specific being a provider with SSB, Jennifer Bialke is their program contact over there. So if you're a provider who wants to ensure that you have a contract to provide services to individuals who are blind or visually impaired, she's a great resource as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Tony to talk about the waiver side of things.
Thanks, Amanda. Well, I'm looking at the clock here and we're kind of running low on time, so I'll try to be quick and give a high-level overview. If this were face-to-face, I'd ask how many people are licensed providers or familiar with the waiver services. So I'm just going to assume some kind of medium level here. first thing we talking a lot of acronyms in this profession, and so I just want to make clear that HCBS waivers are home and community-based services, and with the emphasis on community-based services. And the services that we're talking about, Ryan talked a little bit about exploration as one of those employment services, development, support services, and we also have pre-vocational services. So one of the things that you need to check out so you need to determine which service provider category you fall under, and that's that last bullet point. Are you a currently licensed provider or a new service provider? One thing I wanted to make sure that I mentioned is that pre-vocational services will be going under some changes coming in 2021 as part of our waiver reimagine efforts to simplify this complex system. So that's why I'm going to provide a high-level overview, because the waiver system and reimbursement is a very complex system, but I'll try to break it down very simply for folks as we try to move through this in a couple of minutes here. But if you do have a 245D license, and just to give you a little bit of information, 245D is part of this, is the state statute that this is covered under. So next slide, please. Basically, you have two steps that you're going to be dealing with if you're a licensed provider. And I could end my whole presentation right here with these 2 bullet points. Is you could call licensing to have your service updated, and then you would call provider enrollment to have it updated. And that could be done, but I'm going to give you a little bit more information than that, because I've been told that when you call in, sometimes it takes you're on hold for a little while, and that can be frustrating. But you need to take a look at your license and see if you have any of these employment services on your license. And if you are new to this, I would encourage you to add all those employment services to your license. Then the next step would be to have that as provided on your enrollment record. And so when you look at that as Minnesota Healthcare Program enrollment, the healthcare part of that comes from is that these funds are through Medicare, through the Center of Medicare and Medicaid Services. So, we'll have links on these, but one of the important concepts here is that you complete the service request form to provide proof that you are qualified to provide these services. And that's what you do with provider enrollment. I'll walk through it a little more with that next slide, Ryan. Okay. So the 245D license process, you can call that number, but that link for the pre-application workshop will give you a little bit more information. So when you do call, you have a little more information ready for that phone call. So when you make that phone call, that licensing department will discuss all aspects of the application process and the documentation required, and connect you with that online portal. And that pre-application worksheet, one of the things is determining the type of services that you provide. And one of the first questions is what are the level of those services? Employment services are intensive support services. And on that application, there's a link to the Community-Based Services Manual, commonly referred to as the CBSM, and that has a link to the definition and all the services for each of those intensive support services. So then you can check the box for each of those services that you intend to provide. Once you get through that, then you make an appointment with a licensor who will walk you all the way through the online application after you complete the pre-application process. Part of that application process includes a $500 licensing fee. After you do that, background studies for the controlling individuals in your organization will be done. I think one of the key things there is that you have liability insurance, background studies are cleared, and then the license is issued. Then you go to the next steps. You're dealing with two entities, licensing and then enrollment. And provider enrollment is the last connection that you make. And so if you go to these links that are provided on the PowerPoint, that will really give you all you need to do to be enrolled as a provider as well. And then you can begin delivering services. So with 5 minutes left, Ryan, do we have any questions in the chat?
Taking myself off mute, it's hard for me to be 100% sure because I'm sharing screens, but I have not identified any unanswered questions in the chat or in the Q&A. I noticed that Taylor had a question around CARF accreditation CARF accreditation and how that will factor into the dual enrollment process in the future. And Amanda, I know you touched a little bit during your time when you were talking about that question. Is there anything else that we feel like we want to cover there?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think right now, VRS, now SSB is different, but we would continue to have that CARF requirement for providers who want to do unlimited, business with VRS. So, as part of the LUV increase, we hope that that's a great option for providers who, are smaller providers or new wanting to come, as I said, sort of, kind of dip their toe in the waters. We are working around, because one of the things that CARF does is that it is that accreditation, that quality assurance. So by providers having that, it provides assurance to us that providers are, providing quality services, et cetera. And so with LUV, I know that that's something that Kim Babine, the Director of Community Partnerships, and her team are looking at developing, because right now there really aren't any quality assurance standards. And so they will be doing that as part of the LUV, providers. But for right now, CARF will remain. It's something that we continue to look at and to evaluate, but for the time being, it is as it is. So I hope that answers your question, Taylor.
Yep, and I think I would just add on as a general note, for all of our service of provider alignment, we've got all this great stuff that we're preparing for July implementation and rolling out. I think we also know, in more of a long-term focus, like what are the ways that we can just continue to make it easier to work across our both programs, to make it so it's not separate, separate administrative practices and requirements and training. And the more we can do to keep aligning, I think is something we're all eyeing on more of a long-term basis.
All right, so feel free to, if you have any final questions here, to put them in the Q&A or in the chat. Someone did also ask in the Q&A if the PowerPoint would be sent out to participants, and just as a reminder that you all will be getting a recording of the presentation, so the slides will be, you'll be able to see those in the video on that recording. Those will most likely be sent out later this afternoon. So any other questions, feel free to put them in. I know last time we, after waiting a minute or two, we ended, and then we got kind of a flurry of questions that came in as everyone was signing out. So we can just hang tight for another minute or so and see if any other questions come in.
Great. While we're hanging tight, I'll just also, for contact information, anything that we covered today that you wanted to follow up with one of our presenters on for more information, we've also got our emails and phone numbers here. You can feel free to follow up with us if you're watching, even if you're watching it recorded and you would like to follow up with us. Here's our information.
All right, it looks like we have one more question that's coming in the Q&A from Larissa Beck. How long would you say the process would be to become an LUV?
Yeah, Larissa, that's a really good question. I guess I don't have like a time frame. I think sometimes it depends on how quickly You're able to fill out the paperwork, and I know sometimes with the services and the fee structure, sometimes there's a little bit of back and forth. I know that we are working really diligently behind the scenes to make sure that we have the infrastructure to move applications through our process. And some of that are things that are kind of outside of our hands. You know, we have to kind of move it up the chain for approvals and back down. You know, I don't have an estimate, but what I will say is we know that we're going to have more inquiries. We know that we're going to be doing more of this, and our goal is to move it through the process as quickly as possible. If you want to follow up with me separately, send me an email and I can connect you with Ann and Sarah, who do this every day. They might be able to give you a better answer than I can.
Awesome. Thank you so much to Amanda, Ryan, and Tony for presenting for us today. And just a reminder that the next session in the 2020 Minnesota APSE Virtual Conference will be next Tuesday. We will have Wendy DeVore from Career Ventures and Christine Marble from Voc Rehab Services, the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Unit, will be presenting on unmasking technological barriers and remote access for people with a hearing loss. So we hope to see you next Tuesday, and I hope you all have a great rest of the week. Thanks again, Amanda, Ryan, and Tony.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep, thanks, Danielle, and thanks everyone who's attending for all your work and for your passion in Employment First. We're excited to be here today, and have a good afternoon.